What's something you wish your family would just admit already?
I wasn't invited to dinner. Not officially, anyway. The only thing I got was a text from my sister, Chloe, sent around 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday, short and smug, as if it had been drafted weeks ago and she'd just been waiting for the right moment to click send. Tonight's dinner is for winners only. That was it, no location, no time, no hint of irony, just that razor-edged little sentence dressed up like a joke, as if I was supposed to laugh along and pretend I didn't know exactly what it meant. As if it hadn't always meant the same damn thing in our family. So I did what I always did. I didn't ask questions, didn't reply, didn't let it ruin my day on the surface. I put my phone down, stared out the window for a bit, then made myself a coffee I never finished. I let the silence settle around me like armor. And a few hours later, while they were clinking champagne glasses in some overpriced restaurant with mood lighting and name-dropping the usual business acquaintances they only half liked, my face was being broadcast on CNBC. 3 hours. That's how long it took for everything to flip. I didn't plan it this way, God. If I had, it would have sounded petty, maybe even pathetic, but somehow the universe does this thing where it waits until you're just barely holding your bitterness in check, and then it gives you the mic. I was sitting on my couch, legs tucked under a blanket, wearing an old college hoodie with a hole in the sleeve, watching reruns of some true crime docuseries while half listening to my co-founder Brian sending me updates from the post-closing media team. I'd signed the deal that morning for years of our lives folded into a couple of carefully worded contracts, 30-something pages each, all initialed and timestamped and filed by noon. The company verse was mine, at least conceptually. I started it on a couch not much fancier than the one I was sitting on that night, after leaving a job where my manager once told me I wasn't assertive enough to lead engineers, like confidence was something you measured in decibels. Verse began as a side project, a quiet rebellion. An idea sketched out on napkins and pitched decks at 2 in the morning. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't shiny. But it worked. And suddenly, after 4 years of being ignored at conferences, patronized in boardrooms, and laughed out of my own family's living room when I tried to explain what fintech even was, I had just sold that same startup for over $120 million. The first time I saw my name on the bottom ticker of CNBC, I didn't react right away. It was surreal, like seeing yourself in a dream but knowing you're still awake. My phone buzzed, Brian again, this time just one word, on. I glanced at the screen, and there I was on air, in a blazer I hated, smiling like I hadn't been sweating through 2 NDAs for the last 6 weeks. The segment was short, but the headline was loud. Ava Bentoncel's verse becomes youngest female founder in fintech to close 9-figure deal. For a second, I just stared. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I grabbed my phone, opened the family group chat, and dropped the link to the CNBC article. No message. No explanation. Just the link. And then I watched the dots appear, disappear, then appear again. It was a beautiful kind of silence, the kind that's heavy with the weight of realization, the kind you can feel all the way down your spine. Chloe saw it first, I could tell from the read receipts. Then Mom. Then Dad. No one said anything for a good 10 minutes. The chat, usually buzzing with wedding updates from Chloe or links to whatever article Dad thought made him sound smart that week, went completely still. It was like dropping a grenade into a dinner party and walking away. And I did walk away, mentally at least. I turned the TV off, set my phone on silent, and poured myself a drink. Not champagne. Just bourbon neat. Because while they were out toasting their own curated version of success, perfect teeth, overpriced handbags, and startup ideas that never made it past brunch, I was sitting on a secret that had just become very, very public. The thing you have to understand about my family is that they don't hate failure. They hate embarrassment. They hate not having control of the story. My mother, Carol, built her entire identity around being an image consultant before Instagram made everyone think they were one. My father, Graham, is a lawyer who never talks unless he's filling. And Chloe, well, Chloe was the family brand. Blonde, beautiful, forever featured in her own fake little empire of lifestyle content and curated chaos. I was the one who didn't make sense. The quiet one. The awkward one. The tech one, as if that explained anything at all. When Chloe sent that message, "Dinner is for winners only," it wasn't just a dig. It was a thesis statement. It was everything they'd been saying to me for the last 10 years, just condensed into one smug line and a smirking tone. They'd made their judgment. And now it had turned on them. I wish I could say I was satisfied in that moment, that the money, the headline, the sudden pivot in power made it all worth it. But the truth is, I just felt quiet. Like everything I'd been waiting for had arrived and sat next to me on the couch, just as awkward as I was, unsure of what came next. The only sound in the apartment was the soft clink of the ice in my glass and the low hum of the city outside. No congratulations call. No apology. Just the ghost of that text, still sitting in my notifications. Dinner is for winners only. And now, apparently, I was one. The message sat there in the group chat like a lit fuse, silent, small, but absolutely impossible to ignore. Just the link to the CNBC article, nothing else, no preamble, no explanation, no grandstanding. Just a line that said everything they'd ever refused to hear from me, finally shouted by a national news network. And after years of being dismissed, politely excluded, quietly erased from every important moment under the excuse of "you're always working" or "you're not really into this stuff anyway," the silence that followed my link felt less like revenge and more like an overdue shift in the atmosphere, like the moment before a thunderstorm hits and you can actually taste the electricity. I watched the little gray dots on the screen pulse and vanish again and again, a choreography of hesitation that was, frankly, predictable. The kind of stunned confusion you'd expect from people who were suddenly forced to rewrite the entire narrative they'd built around you, only now the audience wasn't a dinner table or a family brunch, but the whole damn country. Chloe was the first to type. Her name popped up at the top of the chat, the message bubble opened, and I could feel the ghost of her condescension before she even finished typing, because I knew her style, I knew her tone. That fake curious inflection she used when she wanted to sound warm, but couldn't help revealing her competitive streak. She typed, paused, deleted, typed again. Eventually, she settled on the most infuriatingly safe sentence I'd seen in years. "Wow, this is unexpected. Congrats, I guess? Why didn't you tell us?" That was Chloe in a nutshell, always pretending not to be rattled, always trying to grab the upper hand by acting like things didn't matter unless she said they did, as if my success somehow needed her stamp of acknowledgement to be real. I didn't respond. I didn't even open the chat fully, just let the notification bar float at the top of my screen while I finished my drink and let the moment breathe. Carol, my mother, followed a few minutes later with a single thumbs-up reaction to the article link. Not even a sentence. Just that absurd little gesture that felt more like a digital shoulder shrug than anything resembling maternal pride. For a woman who once gave Chloe a full-page write-up in her holiday newsletter for hosting a highly curated backyard bridal tasting, her response to my 9-figure company exit was practically passive-aggressive performance art. Still, I waited. I waited because I knew it wasn't over, not really. Silence in our family was never the end. It was the drumroll. The moment before the excuses started flowing, carefully rehearsed, delicately designed to pull the spotlight back to where they thought it belonged. And sure enough, it came, an hour later, like clockwork. Carol sent another message, this time a full paragraph, carefully composed to walk the line between motherly concern and subtle control. "We were planning on inviting you, but we assumed you'd be too busy. And with everything going on with Chloe's rebrand, we thought it would just be a smaller gathering. No offense, darling. You've always done your own thing, and we respect that, of course." It was almost poetic, really, how she'd managed to pack so much backhanded diplomacy into 4 sentences, as if I should be grateful she even thought to mention me at all, as if their exclusion of me from their winners only dinner was somehow my fault for being too independent, too quiet, too inconvenient to their perfect little narrative. I stared at her words, read them twice, then tossed my phone onto the couch and stood up to walk around the room because the adrenaline was spiking and I needed to move, needed to physically shake off the urge to scream. This wasn't the first time they'd pretended not to notice what I'd built. They'd done it for years at birthdays, holidays, Family events where I was always asked about my little project as if I were knitting scarves in a basement somewhere instead of leading teams, pitching to venture capitalists, writing code. Burning through sleepless nights while Chloe posted filtered photos of lavender lattes and called it a brand. I remembered, vividly, one Thanksgiving when I tried to explain verse to my father over dinner, how I'd built a platform for decentralized finance tools with real-time adaptive analytics, and he blinked at me, smiled vaguely, then turned to Chloe to ask how her engagement ring photos were performing on Instagram. That moment stayed with me, not because it was painful, though it was, but because it was so deliberate. They weren't confused. They just didn't care. So no, I didn't feel guilt for dropping that article into their pristine little family bubble. I didn't feel obligated to answer Chloe's fake curiosity or Carol's revisionist explanations. But part of me still wanted something, even if I wasn't sure what it was: recognition, maybe, or just the satisfaction of watching their expressions when they realized the daughter they'd written off as irrelevant had, without their approval or their help, become something they couldn't ignore anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because I was buzzing with the strange, heavy awareness that something irreversible had happened. The power had shifted. Quietly, without announcement, without applause, the balance that had always tilted toward Chloe and Carol and their curated dominance had suddenly cracked. And beneath that surface, I was already planning my next move. 2 days later, I made a reservation at the Argonne, the same high-end restaurant where Chloe had hosted that little winners-only dinner. I asked for a table near the back, requested the same server they always used, and dressed in exactly what I wore when I signed the deal: a plain black blazer, dark jeans, and no makeup. I didn't go to gloat. I went to reclaim something they never thought I deserved: a seat at the table. Not theirs. Mine. And when I walked in, right as they were settling into their second course, I saw the flicker in Chloe's eyes before she even recognized me fully: a flash of panic, a flinch of disbelief, followed by a clumsy smile that barely hid the way her throat tightened as she whispered something to Carol. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I let the moment hang like a warning in the air. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't even look like revenge at all. It looks like showing up, sitting down, and letting your silence speak louder than any applause. The moment I stepped into the restaurant, I could feel the air shift, not just because I was walking into a room I had deliberately avoided for years, but because this place, the Argonne, wasn't just some high-end dining spot with crystal stemware and sous-vide pork belly. It was sacred ground for people like my family, a stage where reputations were cultivated and silently broadcast through carefully selected wine pairings, hushed laughter, and those infuriatingly calculated pauses between. Sentences designed to imply superiority without having to say a word. I wasn't there to confront anyone, not directly, not with the kind of drama they'd expect from television, but I wasn't there by accident either. I wanted to be seen, not because I needed their validation, but because I wanted them to sit with the discomfort of seeing me in the exact space from which they had so deliberately excluded me. I wanted them to choke on the irony. I'd made the reservation under a different name, something generic, forgettable, because the point wasn't spectacle, it was control. I didn't need a spotlight. I had CNBC for that. What I needed was presence, proximity, the subtle power of occupying a space they deemed inaccessible to me, and doing so with an ease that would force them to reevaluate every smug assumption they'd ever made about who I was and who I wasn't. I requested a table 2 spots over from theirs, close enough that I could hear the clink of Carol's necklace hitting her glass as she gestured, but far enough that I didn't need to speak unless I wanted to, which, for the record, I didn't. They were already seated when I arrived, Chloe in some designer floral nonsense that probably cost more than my first MacBook, Carol draped in beige and pearls like a walking ad for generational wealth, and Graham, my father, predictably stoic behind his glasses, nodding occasionally, but saying almost nothing, as if the role of supportive father only existed in his life as an accessory to his wife's curated narrative. Their table was filled with small, expensive plates that no one was really eating, conversation stilted and performative in that way people speak when they know they're being watched or think they are the ones doing the watching. I walked in quietly, wearing the same outfit I wore to sign the deal, simple black blazer, jeans, hair pulled back, and I didn't look at them, not directly, not yet. I wanted the moment to arrive slowly, like steam rising from a plate, unavoidable and unannounced. The maitre d' recognized me, not from television, but from the neighborhood, and offered a polite nod, followed by a soft "Miss Benton" that he probably didn't even realize was loud enough to carry across the room. But it did. Chloe's head snapped up first, eyes scanning the entrance like a woman who'd just spotted a ghost she wasn't ready to see. Her smile faltered, just a flicker, just enough to reveal the crack beneath her perfectly curated face. Carol turned next, slower, more deliberate, like someone checking for damage after hearing glass break in another room. When she saw me, her jaw didn't drop, that would have been too honest, but her fingers tightened around her wine glass just slightly, the only giveaway that her sense of control had just suffered a quiet but devastating blow. I was escorted to my table by the window, positioned at just the right angle that, if any of them wanted to keep an eye on me without being obvious, they'd have to shift their posture in that unmistakable way that screams discomfort. I ordered a single glass of champagne, not because I particularly liked champagne, but because I knew that's what they had ordered, and there was something undeniably satisfying about mirroring their rituals while making them feel like they were the ones imitating me. I took my time, let the meal arrive without urgency, read a few messages on my phone from Brian, who, to his credit, had resisted the urge to call me 10 times with follow-ups about the post-acquisition logistics, and I let myself enjoy the quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when you finally realize that you don't need to prove anything to anyone in the room. At some point during the second course, just after my risotto was served with a truffle foam that would have made Chloe roll her eyes if I'd ordered it at a family dinner, a small envelope was delivered to my table. Inside was a note, handwritten in Chloe's looping, artificial cursive that always looked like it had been taught by a branding consultant. "Can we talk?" That was all it said. Not, "I'm proud of you." Not, "Congratulations." Just, "Can we talk?" As if the years of casual disregard, of passive digs, of birthday calls that always came 2 days late, could be swept aside with a forward olive branch slid across a linen tablecloth. I folded the note back into the envelope without reacting and placed it face down beside my plate. I didn't look over at their table, didn't offer a nod or a smile or even the satisfaction of eye contact. Instead, I lifted my glass, sipped slowly, and leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the moment settle fully into my bones. I didn't need to say no. The silence said it for me. And when the waiter returned to my table 20 minutes later with a surprise dessert, creme brulee, compliments of the house, along with a discreet congratulations from the chef who'd apparently seen me on television, I accepted it with a thank you that was just loud enough to be overheard. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, not just of the dessert but of the knowledge that I had finally taken control of the story they had tried so hard to write without me. They had their dinner for winners. And now I had mine. But the story didn't end there. Because as I was finishing my coffee, preparing to leave, I saw Carol rise from her seat with that deliberate grace she always used when she wanted the room to notice her without appearing to try. She approached my table alone, her expression unreadable, her steps slow but certain, and for a split second, I wondered if she was actually going to apologize, if decades of manipulation could somehow be undone by a moment of maternal clarity. But of course, it wasn't an apology she came with. It was a request. "I'd like to come by your office," she said, voice low but firm, her eyes scanning my face as if searching for a crack in my composure. "I think we need to talk. Just the two of us. About the future." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just nodded, not out of agreement, but out of sheer curiosity. Because if Carol Benton wanted something from me, something more than attention, more than approval, then I was going to make damn sure I understood why. And just like that, the balance shifted again. This time, not with silence, but with a door cracked open. Not for reconciliation, but for something much more dangerous, negotiation. There is a very particular kind of tension that builds in the air when someone who has spent years pretending not to see your values suddenly appears at your door, not with congratulations or humility, but with an agenda disguised as civility. cloaked in a tone that tries to mask desperation with dignity, and that was exactly the feeling that hit me the moment I opened the conference room door and saw my mother standing there, perfectly composed, immaculately dressed in one of those neutral toned blazers that cost more than my rent had been in college, and carrying a leather folder that practically screamed, "This is a business call, not an emotional reckoning." She didn't say hello, didn't ask how I was, didn't comment on the office layout, the glass walls, the skyline view that I had specifically chosen not to boast about, though I was absolutely certain she had noticed every inch of it and filed it away somewhere behind those sharp eyes of hers. She simply extended her hand, never a hug, not Carol, and walked in like she had every right to be there, like she wasn't the same woman who had sent me a scented invitation to Chloe's bridal shower but forgot to include a +1 because you never bring anyone anyway. I closed the door behind her, letting the silence stretch long enough to make it clear that I was not going to carry the emotional labor of small talk, and gestured toward the chair across from mine. She sat without hesitation, unfolding a crisp stack of printed materials and aligning them carefully in front of her, as if that could somehow lend gravity to whatever it was she was about to say. And then she launched into it, no preamble, no sugarcoating, just straight into the pitch, like a seasoned executive addressing a skeptical investor. Chloe's business, she explained, had hit a few bumps in the road, which, from Carol's mouth, was essentially code for hemorrhaging money, losing market share, and barely scraping together enough curated content to keep the illusion alive. Their brand was losing traction. Influencer engagement had plateaued. Product sales were down despite the soft relaunch they did last quarter, and though they'd initially secured a modest line of credit through a family connection, the investor had pulled out citing concerns about long-term sustainability. And that's when she said it calmly, as if it were the most logical thing in the world, like she wasn't suggesting something completely audacious. She wanted me to consider investing in Chloe's company. Not because Chloe had asked, of course, and not because they were in dire straits, no, Carol would never admit weakness outright, but because, according to her, this could be an opportunity for you to diversify your portfolio and support your sister in a meaningful way. The way she said it, like she was offering me some kind of redemption arc, made my skin crawl. It was the same patronizing tone she'd used when I was 13 and wanted to audition for the school play instead of doing summer debate camp. Like my success was a nice little hobby, impressive in its own right, but still something that could now be folded back into the family narrative where it belonged, serving a greater collective purpose that always somehow meant putting Chloe at the center of the story. I listened, because I had learned, over the years, that nothing unsettles people like a woman who listens without interrupting, but my mind was already racing through the contradictions. This was the woman who once told me that business isn't personal, Ava, when I confronted her about why she had given Chloe money to launch her lifestyle brand, but had only offered me moral support when I was trying to get Verse off the ground. This was the same woman who, during my first funding round, suggested that I might want to consider bringing in someone with more charisma to handle investor meetings. And now she was here, sitting in my office, asking me to prop up the brand that had been built on borrowed aesthetics and hollow messaging, because her golden child had finally run out of shine. I didn't respond right away, and I think that silence made her nervous, because for the first time in a very long while, she blinked, just once, a small fracture in her otherwise impenetrable facade. Then she pivoted again, like a pro, and started to frame it as a win-win. Think about the narrative, she said. The Benton sisters uniting forces, women in business supporting each other. It could be such a powerful story, especially now, with your name everywhere. You could lend her credibility. And she could bring, she hesitated, searching for the right word. Flair. That was the moment I nearly laughed, and not because it was funny, but because it was so deeply insulting that she still couldn't see the difference between substance and style, between what I had built, through code, through strategy, through relentless nights of work, and what Chloe had assembled through filters, hashtags, and borrowed aesthetics. But I didn't laugh. I didn't raise my voice or stand up or tell her to get the hell out of my office. Instead, I smiled. A very calm, measured smile that probably made her more nervous than any outburst would have. And then I told her I'd think about it. She left a few minutes later, her face unreadable, the folder still sitting on the conference table where she had left it, probably expecting me to go through it with a red pen and start crunching numbers. But as soon as the door closed behind her, I picked up my phone and dialed Brian. "I want to invest," I said, before he could even ask how the meeting went. "But not in her. I want to go after her competition, the one that's been quietly eating her audience share in the mid-tier influencer market. Let's put some money into them. Let's make it anonymous. Let's keep it quiet." There was a long pause on the line, followed by a low whistle. "You're sure?" he asked, not because he didn't think I could do it, but because he knew exactly what it meant. "I'm not doing it to destroy her," I said, and that was mostly true. "I'm just investing in something I believe in." It took less than 6 weeks. The competitor launched a new campaign that outpaced Chloe's in reach, engagement, and actual conversion metrics. They did everything better, quieter, and without the weight of family legacy dragging them down. Chloe's brand didn't implode overnight, but it began to fray first slowly, then all at once, like a hem unraveling with no one there to stitch it back up. Carol never followed up about the investment. She didn't need to. The silence said everything. And through it all, I kept building. I didn't gloat. I didn't send her the analytics. I didn't leak the investment. I didn't even share the news with the group chat, which by then had gone largely dormant except for the occasional passive-aggressive update about Chloe's time to reset and reflect, which, as far as I could tell, meant yoga retreats and vague Instagram captions about growth. What I had done wasn't just revenge. It was precision. It was restraint. It was, in every way that mattered, a correction. And yet, somewhere beneath the calm satisfaction of having finally wrested the narrative out of their hands, I felt something else creeping in, something smaller, harder to name. It wasn't regret. It wasn't guilt. But it was close. Because once you win, once you take back the power they denied you for so long, the question that always follows, whether you ask it aloud or not, is, now what? It had been nearly 5 months since the deal was signed, the article went viral, and the family's delicate ecosystem, built so carefully on appearances, unspoken hierarchies, and the unyielding assumption that some people were born to shine while others were meant to orbit, began to quietly, irrevocably fracture under the weight of something it had never truly acknowledged: me. During those months, the silence that had once felt suffocating began to feel strangely liberating, like breathing air at high altitude, thin but pure, the kind that makes you dizzy and clear-headed all at once. I didn't expect gratitude, and I certainly didn't expect reconciliation. What I hadn't anticipated, though, was how unprepared I was for the aftermath of getting exactly what I thought I wanted. Because success, when it finally arrives without permission, does not come bearing instructions on what to do with the ghosts that remain. Chloe had gone quiet first, pulling back from social media with the kind of public statements that always carried an undercurrent of performative vulnerability. Time for self-care, a season of reflection, a much-needed pause to reassess her brand mission. The irony of her finally recognizing the need for reflection, after years of curating her life to look like a perfectly styled magazine spread, wasn't lost on me, but I found no pleasure in it either. Watching her retreat from the spotlight she'd so ruthlessly defended didn't feel like victory. It felt like watching someone lose a game they never knew the rules to, and worse, still pretending they had meant to fold all along. Carol, for her part, had stopped reaching out entirely. The group chat, once a cacophony of passive-aggressive scheduling wars, links to articles no one read, and the occasional family photo op, had gone dormant, left to collect digital dust. My father, never one to insert himself into anything emotional or unscheduled, simply disappeared behind a wall of generic holiday greetings and forwarded news clips he assumed would impress me. Not one of them ever said the words I knew were buried deep under layers of pride and confusion. "You were right, we were wrong, we didn't see you, but now we do." In that void, I kept building, not out of necessity but because motion was the only thing that kept the questions quiet. Brian and I expanded the team, made strategic hires, explored new verticals, and for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to consider what ambition looked like without the constant need to prove I deserved to be in the room. But the more I built, the more I realized that success, true, unfiltered, not for Instagram success, wasn't a destination you arrive at with a glass of champagne and applause. It was quieter, lonelier, and infinitely more complex. It didn't erase what had been done. It didn't change the fact that I had spent most of my adult life trying to shrink myself into something acceptable to people who only ever wanted reflections of themselves. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, gray and still and entirely unremarkable, that the text came through, a small digital ripple that broke 5 months of silence like a pebble dropped in a frozen lake. It was from Chloe. The message was short, direct, and stripped of the frilly language she usually wrapped around her discomfort. I know you think you won. But honestly, we still don't get it. For a long moment, I stared at the screen. Not because I was surprised, Chloe never missed an opportunity to make a point feel personal, but because of the brutal honesty tucked between the lines. She wasn't asking a question. She wasn't starting a fight. She was making a statement, one that echoed everything I had known since I was old enough to notice what was missing between us. They didn't understand, and they never would. Because understanding would require letting go of the version of me they had spent years constructing to make themselves feel superior. Understanding would mean accepting that they had not just overlooked something, they had actively chosen not to see it. I could have ignored it. I could have responded with a lecture, a statistic, a screenshot of the next investor round that had just closed at a valuation higher than the one that made the news. But I didn't. Instead, I typed one sentence and hit send without waiting for the next thought to catch up to me. Exactly. That was all. One word. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Because I had finally reached a place where I no longer needed them to understand. I didn't need their apologies or their admiration. What I needed was space, freedom, and the quiet certainty that I had, in spite of them and, because of them, created something that stood on its own. A week later, Brian invited me to speak at a tech summit in Chicago. It was one of those glossy events filled with panels, keynotes, and slightly too polished young founders hoping to be the next big thing, and while I had initially declined the invitation, public speaking still felt like standing naked in a room full of judges. Something in me shifted. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was ego. Maybe it was just time. I said yes. Standing backstage, moments before I was introduced, I checked my phone one last time. No messages. No new attempts from Carol. No passive-aggressive likes from Chloe. Just silence. The same silence that used to feel like exile, but now felt like armor. I stepped into the light, cleared my throat, and began not with metrics or strategy or some perfectly rehearsed anecdote, but with a truth that had taken years to fully understand. Success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right, even when no one's watching. The crowd listened, nodded, applauded, all the expected cues of approval present and accounted for, but none of it mattered as much as the moment after, when I left the building, walked alone through the city streets and past a massive screen above the plaza, bright, loud, alive with movement. My face appeared briefly in the rotation, part of a CNBC replay, and for the first time, I didn't stop to look. I just kept walking. At the crosswalk, I turned off my phone and slipped it into my coat pocket. The world buzzed around me, people rushing, horns blaring, the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart threading its way into the air, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of their voices, their doubts, their absence. I just felt quiet. Maybe that's what winning really looks like, not the applause, not the headlines, not even the revenge. Maybe it's just choosing to leave the table without waiting for an invitation. Because when the dinner is only for winners, the real power lies in deciding whether you still want to eat with them at all.